tonight, and we hope that on this beautiful Monday that you're well, your families are well, safe, and healthy. Thank you for joining us this evening. So as you know, I'm Jen Rayfield, and I'm coming to you from New Jersey, and I'm really looking forward to talking with you tonight about exchange rates. So that's what we're going to be talking about this evening. It's topic 6.2 from the course and exam description. But these are the objectives in terms of content. So there's a couple of new terms we really want to make sure we can define, including exchange rate and what it means for currencies to appreciate and to depreciate. We also want to understand and explain how currencies are valued relative to one another, and we want to be able to calculate the value of one currency in terms of another. So those are the content objectives. Tonight, we're going to be focusing on skill 1C, which asks us to be able to identify an economic concept, principle, or model using quantitative data or calculations. All right, so you're going to know that you've got it when you can do each of these things. When you can define the important terms, as I said, they're exchange rate, currency appreciation, and depreciation. You also want to make sure you can express an exchange rate both numerically and in words. And that's where we're going to spend the bulk of our time tonight, because if you can do that, you've got the rest of this topic and a lot of this unit in really good shape. We want to be able to look at two exchange rates and determine which currency has appreciated and which currency has depreciated. And finally, we want to be able to explain how a change in exchange rates is going to affect a nation's balance of payments. So on Friday, when Mr. Romano reviewed topic 6.1, he pointed out that Unit 6 is not going to be on the AP Macroeconomics exam this year. And that, of course, raises the question, why are we going to spend this week making sure that you are confident in each of the topics associated with Unit 6? And the answers really fall into several buckets. So, in any given principles of macroeconomics course, international trade and open economy are important topics. And when you move on to the next level of your economic study, especially if you earn credit for a principles course or an Econ 101 course using this year's macro exam, when you get into the subsequent courses, you'd be at a real disadvantage if you weren't familiar with the topics in Unit 6, if you didn't understand exchange rates and foreign exchange markets, and if you didn't understand how changes in exchange rates affect international trade and how economic policies influence the supply of and demand for currency. So these are topics that are really going to be beneficial to you when you go on to subsequent study of economics. But for all of the high school economics teachers out there, those of your teachers who are working with you on this topic and have encouraged you to watch these videos, it's really important to them and to me and to the College Board that you understand in the real world how important international economics is. The language you're going to use and learn in this unit will make you a much more literate consumer of information, especially information about the global economy. So with that in mind, Mr. Romano and I care very deeply about making sure that you feel as confident in the topics in Unit 6 as you do in the topics that are going to be covered on the exam. And keep in mind too, the skills that we're going to be looking at are skills that appear in each of the first 5 units that will be on the test. And especially once we start getting into 6.4, 6.5, and 6.6, we are going to be reviewing a lot of the economic indicators and a lot of the economic policies that we've already talked about. So in some ways, this is going to be review for you as well. All right, so with that said, let's go ahead and pick up where you left off on Friday. And this was the question that Mr. Romano left you with. It was the 2014 question 3, and we're just going to do parts A and B. So in this problem, we're told that the United States and South Korea are trading partners and that the United States has a 0 current account balance. Then we're asked to assume that the inflation rate in the United States decreases relative to the inflation in South Korea. Based on the change in the inflation rate, in this case a decrease, will U.S. exports to South Korea increase or decrease? So even though the question doesn't ask us to explain, I'm going to make sure you know and understand the reasoning behind the answer. So you should have been able to determine that U.S. exports to South Korea will increase. And here is the reason why. Because ceteris paribus, or all else equal, a decrease in the inflation rate means that prices are increasing in the United States at a relatively slower pace than they are in South Korea. Relatively is a big word in international economics. We really want to understand what that means, a relatively slower pace. As a result, US goods and services are going to be relatively cheaper to South Koreans, and as a result, they'll buy more US goods and services. So US exports to South Korea will increase. So think about this based on the decrease in the inflation rate. So let's say that the inflation rate in the United States is 4% and the inflation rate in South Korea is also 4%. A decrease in the inflation rate could mean that the US inflation rate falls to something like 3% or 2%, while there's no change in the inflation rate in South Korea. So what we're saying is that we're not saying the inflation rate becomes negative. We're just saying that it decreases relative to the inflation rate in South Korea. And so at the margins, that's going to change consumers' behavior. All right, part B says, based on the change in US exports in part A, answer each of the following. The first part of the question asks, will the US current account balance remain at zero, be in surplus, or be in deficit? So back up in the problem, it said the US had a zero current account balance. So if US exports increases, what happens to the current account balance? Well, you learned last night that exports are treated as credits to the current account. So that's going to move the current account balance into a surplus. If we didn't know the starting position, we wouldn't be able to say that it would become a surplus, but we'd be able to say that it moved toward a surplus because credits to the current account move the current account balance towards a surplus. Since we know that the starting place is zero in terms of the current account balance, we know that the credits are going to put it into a surplus. So again, even though this isn't an explain point, you want to make sure you understand the reasoning why this is the answer. Exports are credits to the current account. As credits to the current account increase, the current account balance moves towards a surplus. Since the current account balance was initially zero, this turns the current account balance into a surplus. The second part of the question asks, what will happen to real gross domestic product in the United States in the short run? And explain. All right, so you'll remember that aggregate demand includes exports and imports. It includes net exports. So if there's an increase in exports, then aggregate demand is going to increase. In the short run, that's going to produce an increase in real GDP. So in the short run, real GDP will increase, and your explanation should include the following. An increase in exports results in an increase in aggregate demand because we know that aggregate demand equals C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So all else equal, if X is going up, then aggregate demand is going up. So in the short run, when there's an upward sloping short run aggregate supply curve, the increase in aggregate demand will increase real GDP. All right, so that's the answer to those questions. All right, there's just one point we want to review before we head into exchange rates, and most of this you learned last night. So aggregate demand, as you've known for a long time now, under the expenditure formula, constitutes the spending on C, I, G, and XN, where C is spending by domestic consumers on goods and services, I is private domestic investment spending, G is spending by the government, and net exports is spending understood in this way, right? Net exports is exports minus imports. And exports are spending by foreigners on domestic goods and services. And remember, GDP, gross domestic product, would include spending by foreigners on domestically produced goods and services. However, the money that domestic consumers spend on foreign goods and services is not counted in US GDP. It's counted in the GDP of other countries. So that's why we have to subtract it out. So spending by foreigners on domestic goods and services is exports, minus spending by domestic consumers on foreign goods and services is imports, and that gives us our net exports. All right, so when exports increases, aggregate demand increases. And when exports increase, you learned last night, more money flows into the country, which moves the trade balance towards a surplus. And since the trade balance is the lion's share of the current account balance will move towards a surplus as well. When imports increase, aggregate demand goes down. Also, when imports increase, more money flows out of the country, the trade balance moves towards a deficit, and therefore the current account moves towards a deficit. All right, so that's all we wanted to review before we get into exchange rates. All right, so what do you need to know? And I would say that what you really need to be able to do is read an exchange rate. That sounds very simple, but in practice, it becomes a little trickier because there are so many different ways to express the same thing when we're talking about exchange rates. So that's where we're going to begin tonight. All right, so first of all, what is currency? Well, we need to know what currency is before we learn what an exchange rate is. And it's basically the name given to the system of money that's used by a country. So you are certainly aware that in the United States, the currency is the US dollar. The Eurozone currency is called the euro. In the United Kingdom, the name of the currency is the British pound sterling, and so on. So some of these are probably familiar to you. You've probably heard of a yen, a yuan, an Australian dollar, a Russian ruble, a Mexican peso. These are the names of the currencies used by these countries. Remember that the Eurozone is comprised of 19 nations. So the EU itself, the European Union, is a cooperative of nations, but not all nations in the European Union actually use the euro as their currency. So the Eurozone describes the 19 nations that are part of the EU for whom the euro is their currency. So these are the trading symbols for these currencies, and they're the standard abbreviations that you'll see. And in more recent exams, you definitely see that the currency symbol is provided. So, I'm sure you know what the dollar sign is. You probably are familiar with the euro sign. This is the sign for the pound. It looks kind of like a cursive L. The yen and the yuan, the Australian dollar, and so on. So the currency signs, you don't have to memorize the currency signs, but you should certainly be familiar with the top four here. Okay, a dollar sign, a euro sign, a pound sign, and a yen sign. But you're going to very likely see these symbols and the written words for the currency when you're looking at a problem. Okay. All right. So now that we know what currency is, what is an exchange rate? So it's basically the price of one country's currency in terms of another. So think about it this way. If you wanted to buy a dollar with a dollar, how many dollars would $1 cost you? And the answer is pretty obvious, $1. But the price of dollars is denominated in other countries' currency because people in other countries purchase dollars when they want to buy US goods and services. US consumers purchase currencies of other countries when they want to buy goods and services produced in other countries. So I'm going to give you some examples and I'm going to show you how these currency exchange rates can be read. So for example, the price of US dollars in Japanese yen. Another way to describe that is the yen price of dollars. It's sometimes expressed as yen per dollar. And I think it's really helpful whenever you see per. So if you see yen per dollar, what you want to read is how many yen per $1, okay? Yen per $1. And basically what we're looking at is the number of yen needed to purchase $1, one US dollar. So now let's look at another example. How about the price of Mexican pesos in Chinese yuan? Now we're going to be talking about the yuan price of pesos, or the yuan per peso, or the yuan per 1 peso. So now can you write this sentence? What would be the next sentence? If when we're talking about the price of US dollars in Japanese yen, we can express it as the number of yen needed to purchase $1, then you should write down here under these two bullets, we're talking about the number of yuan needed to purchase 1 peso. All right, so again, these all say the same thing. It's basically how much yen does it cost to buy a dollar? How many yuan does it cost to buy a peso? So you really need to be familiar with the different ways of expressing that verbally or in words so that you can also do so numerically. All right, so finally, and we're going to spend most of our examples tonight using the price of euros and dollars. So this is also the dollar price of euros, or the dollars per euro. Again, read it as dollars per 1 euro. And this would be the number of dollars needed to purchase 1 euro. The price of euros in dollars is the number of dollars you need to purchase a single euro. All right, so that's what an exchange rate is. It's the price of one country's currency in terms of another. So now, how is it expressed numerically? So let's talk about the price of US dollars in Japanese yen. When I was developing the slides for tonight, I was looking at yesterday's exchange rates. So these are the exchange rates as of April 5th, 2020. They've already changed since then. Okay, so the way we might read it is as follows. 1 US dollar equals 1.0886 Japanese yen, or 1 US dollar equals 108.86 Japanese yen. So what does that mean? It means 1 US dollar costs 108.86 Japanese yen, or 108.86 yen per dollar. What you can also read it backwards, right? If $1 costs 108.86 Japanese yen, then it costs 108.86 yen to buy $1. All right, so see, these are all the same. All of these different ways of writing it mean the price of US dollars and Japanese yen. And I think in my experience, this is like probably one of the two trickiest parts of this, okay, is just recognizing an exchange rate and how to use it when you see it. All right, so let's do that again. We have the price of Mexican pesos and Chinese yuan. So we're looking at how many Chinese yuan do you need to purchase 1 Mexican peso? And in this case, it's about 0.28 or about a quarter. Okay, so if you had 1 Chinese yuan, you could buy 4 Mexican pesos roughly. Not quite, a little bit more. All right, 1 Mexican peso costs 0.8 Chinese yuan, which is 0.28 yuan per peso, which means 0.28 yuan buys 1 peso. All right, let's look at our third example. I'm going to give you the exchange rate, and I want you to see if you can write the 3 bullets underneath. So we're going to look at the price of euros in US dollars. So here was the exchange rate as of yesterday. Can you write the other 3 bullets? Okay, if you can't, this is something you want to practice. All right, so what we're saying here is 1 euro costs 1.08 US dollars, or $1.08. So it can be expressed as $1.08 per euro, or $1.08 buys 1 euro. So that's how you read an exchange rate. All right, so now why do exchange rates even matter? Well, in order to purchase goods and services from another country, you have to buy that country's currency first. So assume that there's international trade between the United States and the Eurozone. So all of these would be examples of purchases that are influenced by exchange rates. In order to buy French cheese, an American consumer first would have to buy euros with US dollars, because the producer of French cheese doesn't do business in dollars, they do business in euros. So if we want to purchase cheese from them, we have to buy euros first. In order to buy an American smartphone, an Italian consumer first has to buy dollars with euros. In order to buy a German car, an American consumer must first purchase euros with dollars. Now, you may have been, maybe you've been to a car dealership. Maybe you've got your driver's license. Maybe you've got a car. Maybe you've been with somebody when they've gone to buy a car. And you certainly know that somebody who buys a foreign produced car isn't buying currency first, but the dealership is. When the Hyundai dealer puts Hyundai cars on its lot, it's paid for them in Korean won. When the Mercedes-Benz dealership buys Mercedes-Benzes to stock in a US car dealership, the dealer has purchased the car with euros. Okay, so regardless of who's actually facilitating the transaction, in order to get a German car, American dollars need to be converted into euros. Okay, and again, the reverse is true. If an Austrian company wanted to hire a US accounting firm, the Austrian company would first have to purchase dollars with euros. All right, so we're going to see how changes in exchange rates affect the prices of goods and services that are being purchased across national boundaries. All right, so the first thing we want to understand is what it means for a currency to appreciate. So here is our exchange rate, the price of euros in dollars. Okay. All right, we can also write that using our signs, right? 1 euro equals $1.08. 1 euro costs $1.08, or $1.08 buys 1 euro. Again, reading this can be expressed in each of these ways. Okay, so if the euro appreciates relative to the dollar, then let's think conceptually what that means first, and then we can try to come up with some numbers that'll make that make sense. So first of all, when a currency appreciates, it means the price of it goes up. Okay, the price of euros in dollars is going to be higher. And effectively what that means is that the euro is going to become more expensive in dollars, right? We can't say the euro gets more expensive by itself, because what do we buy euros with? We buy euros with other currencies. So if the euro appreciates relative to the US dollar, the price of euros and dollars is going to go up, the euro gets more expensive in dollars, or the dollar price of a euro rises. All of those are saying that the euro has appreciated. Each euro effectively costs more dollars. All right, so if 1 euro equals 1.50 US dollars, then that would be an example of appreciation. So look at it this way. If 1 euro costs $1.08, and now 1 euro costs $1.50, the euro has gotten more expensive. Okay, now this is where kids so often get confused, and I'll show you on the next slide how to read it to try to make sure that you don't get confused. So if, again, the euro appreciates, now we might see that 1 euro equals $1.50, or we might read it as 1 euro costs 1.50 US dollars, or $1.50 buys 1 euro. So before, $1.08 bought a euro, now $1.50 is required to buy 1 euro. So the euro is getting more expensive. That's what it means for a currency to appreciate. Okay, so before, again, 1 euro costs 108 US dollars, right? And now 1 euro costs 1.50 US dollars. So if you were to read this before exchange rate and then asked to be compared, if you were to see the initial exchange rate and then shown a subsequent exchange rate, you might very well be asked, which did the euro appreciate or depreciate against the US dollar? And since the number in front of USD is going up, kids so often want to say that the dollar is appreciating, but it's not, right? It means that it used to cost $1.08 to buy a euro. Now that same 1 euro costs $1.50. So the euro has gotten more expensive. Okay, so that's how you need to read these foreign exchange rates. So what does that mean in practical terms? Well, we said that people buy foreign currencies in order to purchase foreign goods and services. Certainly there are people who buy currency to speculate, currency speculation. You buy currency hoping that it will appreciate and that you can sell it for more money. But that's not what we're talking about in this course. We really want to connect appreciating and depreciating currency to international trade. So when the euro appreciates relative to the dollar, it means euros are more expensive in dollars. And what it really means is that Eurozone goods and services are going to cost more in dollars. So let's look at a concrete example. Let's say that a 1 pound box of Belgian chocolate costs 10 euros. Well, when the exchange rate is 1 euro for 1.08 US dollars, that box of Belgian chocolate costs an American consumer $10.80. When 1 euro costs 1.5 US dollars, however, that same box of Belgian chocolates now costs $15. This is an increase in the relative price of the box of chocolate. The box of chocolate still costs 10 euros. That has not changed. However, since the euro has appreciated, you need more dollars to buy the same number of euros. And so the relative cost of that box of chocolate for a foreign consumer paying with dollars has increased. So what conclusion do we draw? When the euro appreciates relative to the dollar, Eurozone goods and services are going to become relatively more expensive to US buyers. Okay, can you imagine the implications for the current account balance from that? All right, now there's one more nuance we want to add to this. When the euro appreciates relative to the US dollar, simultaneously, it is also true that the US dollar is depreciating relative to the euro. So let's see how this works. Remember, the exchange rate between euros and dollars can be expressed as the price of euros in dollars, and that's what we've been looking at, right? The 1 euro equals 1.08 US dollars. okay? But it can also be expressed as the price of dollars in euros. So how do we do that? So we have 1 euro equals $1.08. If we want to find out how many euros we can buy with 1 US dollar, we can simply divide both sides by 1.08, right? Just use some basic algebra. So dividing this side by 1.08 and dividing this side by 1.08 will tell us how many euros we can buy with $1. So in this case, the math is roughly 1 US dollar equals 0.93 euro, right? Or $1 equals 0.93 euro. We can use the symbol or the sign. Okay, so when 1 euro equals $1.08, $1 equals 0.93 euro. These are both true at the same time. It's just a different way of expressing the exchange rate, right? This is dollars per 1 euro. This is euros per $1. Okay. All right, so now let's put this together. So when the euro appreciates relative to the dollar, the euro becomes more expensive in dollars. So this was the example we had before, right? The the euro price of dollars. No, see, I have to think very carefully when I do this. When 1 euro equals 1.08 US dollars, before and after it equals 1.50 US dollars. 1.50 US dollars, then we say that the euro has gotten more expensive. It costs more dollars per euro than it did before. But we can also describe what's happening to dollars in euros. So before we saw 1 US dollar was 0.3 euro, right? Or we could buy a dollar with 0.93 euros. But when the cost of a euro rises to $1.50, if we divide both sides by 150 now, we would find out that 1 US dollar is going to cost 0.66 euro. Okay, so you see how the dollar here, the euro is getting more expensive in dollars, but here the dollar is getting less expensive in euros because it takes fewer euros per dollar than it did before. So these things are happening simultaneously. When the euro appreciates relative to the euro becomes more expensive. But it is also true that the dollar is depreciating relative to the euro, and the dollar becomes less expensive in euros. So that's an important thing to understand. All right, so what does it mean now for a currency to depreciate? So we're going to take these same numbers. We have the dollar depreciating relative to the euro. So whereas before it cost 0.93, that should say euro, 1.93 EUR equals 1 US dollar, and now oh, I have to change that. Please forgive me. So we know that this was 1 USD equals 0.93 EUR, and 1 USD now equals 0.66 EUR. Here we can look at this side where the symbols are correct. $1 per 0.93 euro, $1 now for 0.66 euro. It takes fewer euro to buy each dollar than it did before. So what that means is dollars are cheaper in euros. Dollars are less expensive in euros. That means that US goods and services will cost less in euros than they did before. So an important export from the United States to the rest of the world are smartphones. And let's assume I just picked a figure, a smartphone costs $500. When 1 US dollar costs 0.93 euro, that $500 smartphone costs 465 euros. So that should make sense. 0.93 is a little bit less than a dollar. So the cost of a $500 phone in euros is going to be a little bit less than 500 euros. All right, now what happens when the dollar depreciates to 0.66 euro? Now that same phone costs only 330 euro. So look at how much less expensive that phone is for a Eurozone consumer than it was before. And it's not because the cost of the phone changed, it's because the cost of the dollar changed. So exchange rates have really important implications for the purchasing power of consumers who wish to buy goods and services from other countries. Okay, so when the US dollar depreciates relative to the euro, US goods and services will become relatively less expensive to Eurozone buyers. Okay, so those are the conclusions we need to reach. So now I'm going to put this sort of all together in a summary. When one currency appreciates, the other currency depreciates. We're going to continue with our example. The euro appreciates relative to the US dollar. which means the dollar depreciates relative to the euro. In this light gray here, these all say the same thing. These are all different ways of expressing in words an appreciation in the value of the euro relative to the dollar. The price of a euro in dollars rises, the dollar price of a euro rises, each euro buys more dollars, and the purchasing power of the euro in the foreign exchange market rises. Mr. Romano is going to introduce you to Forex markets tomorrow. So while this is all true when the euro appreciates, these things are all true as the dollar depreciates. So the price of a dollar in euros falls, or the euro price of a dollar falls. Each dollar buys fewer euros. The purchasing power of the dollar in the foreign exchange market falls. All right, these again all say the same thing. They all express a depreciation of the dollar relative to the euro. So now when the current currency appreciates, US goods and services become relatively less expensive in euros. Another way to put this is dollar denominated goods and services become relatively cheaper. So that term denominated refers to the price of the goods and services that you're talking about. So US goods and services are denominated in dollars. So when the euro appreciates, dollar denominated goods and services become relatively cheaper. So what does that mean? Eurozone buyers will purchase more US goods and services. Eurozone imports from the US will rise. US exports to the Eurozone will increase, right? People in Europe are buying more stuff from the United States. The Eurozone imports will rise. The US exports will rise. When Eurozone current account, because imports are rising in the Eurozone, and exports to the when Eurozone imports from the US rise, the Eurozone current account balance moves towards a deficit, right? They're sending money out of the country in order to purchase US goods and services. All right, so now read what happens on the other side. When the dollar depreciates relative to the euro, Eurozone goods and services become relatively more expensive in dollars. Euro-denominated goods and services become relatively more expensive to US consumers. So US buyers will purchase fewer Eurozone goods and services. US imports from the Eurozone will fall. Eurozone exports to the US will fall. And the US current account balance is going to move towards a surplus. All right. So I would say if you can, see if you can walk through all these different ways to write or express the idea of the euro appreciating relative to the dollar, and then connect it to what happens to the purchasing power of consumers and what happens to imports and exports, and then what happens to the current account balance. That's the way you put exchange rates and trade together. All right, so now let's do a couple of questions that kind of mimic the way you might see skill 1C assessed in this unit using exchange rates. So we have the price of the Chinese yuan in Swiss francs, and it changes from 1 yuan costs 7 francs to 1 yuan costs 9 francs. So the question might read, which currency has appreciated? So remember, the number next to Swiss francs is the one that's going up, but what that means is you need more Swiss francs to buy yuan than you did before. So which currency is getting more expensive? Which currency is going up in value? It's the yuan. And so when the yuan is appreciating relative to the franc, which currency is depreciating? The franc is. Okay, let's do another one. Okay, the price of the South Korean won in Indian rupees changes from 1 won costs 0.090 rupees to 1 won costs 0.62 rupees. So now I want you to do this one. Which currency has appreciated? Which currency has gone up in value? Well, before it cost 0.090 rupees to buy 1 won, and now it only costs 0.062 rupees to buy a won. So the rupee is the currency that is going up in value, which means that the won is the currency that is depreciating. Right? Here's another way you might see it written in words. It says the price of the US dollar changes from 24 Mexican pesos per dollar to 26 Mexican pesos per dollar. So how can you work with this problem? Well, my recommendation would be you turn it into an exchange rate using numbers, right? Because if we want to figure out which currency is appreciated and which currency is depreciated, we've used this kind of exchange rate to do that analysis. So what they're saying is 24 Mexican pesos per $1, right? So $1 was 24 Mexican pesos to 26 Mexican pesos per dollar. So now that means per $1 US costs 26 Mexican pesos. So now which currency is appreciated? The US dollar, which means that the Mexican peso has depreciated. All right, now let's extend this into another application. So we're going to use the same change in exchange rates that we did from the previous slide. And we're going to assume that the cost of a US t-shirt is $10. So what is the cost in pesos of the US t-shirt to the Mexican consumer before the change in the exchange rate? Well, if it costs $10 and we know that $1 costs 24 Mexican pesos, we have to multiply 24 times 10. So it's going to cost 240 pesos to purchase that t-shirt from the United States that costs 10 US dollars. So what is the cost in pesos of the US t-shirt after the change in the exchange rate? Well, can you do the same thing? So when it's $10 and it costs 26 pesos to buy $1, it's going to cost 260 pesos to buy $10. So that shirt now costs 260 pesos. It got relatively more expensive. The price of the t-shirt did not change. It's $10. However, the number of pesos needed to purchase $10 worth of US currency has increased, which means that the dollar has appreciated and the Mexican peso has depreciated. All right, one more application. So let's say that the price of a bottle of Italian olive oil in Italy costs 20 euros. At the current exchange rate, a British consumer can purchase the olive oil in Italy for 40 British pounds. What is the exchange rate between the two currencies? Well, again, we're going to write it numerically. So 20 euros equals 40 pounds. That's the exchange rate. So to find the exchange rate in pounds per euro, find out how many pounds 1 euro costs. Okay, and to do that, divide both sides by 20. Right, so we want to isolate 1 euro. So we're going to divide this side by 20 and this side by 20. And what we're going to see is that 1 euro equals 2 British pounds. 1 euro equals 2 British pounds. So what that tells us is the exchange rate is 2 pounds per euro. Now, what if we wanted to find the exchange rate of euros per pound? We'd do something very similar. We want to find the number of euros it costs to buy 1 pound. And so we'll divide both sides by 40. When we do that, we get 1 pound equals 0.5 or half a euro, right? Or we can express it using the signs. 1 pound equals a half a euro. So now the exchange rate is a half a euro per pound. So see that when the exchange rate is 2 pounds per euro, the exchange rate can also be expressed as half a euro per pound. So make sure you really read the question carefully. Are you looking at pounds per 1 euro, right? Per 1 euro, or are you looking at euros per 1 pound? I really think that adding that per 1 is going to make it easier for you to understand when you're looking at pounds per euro or euros per pound. Okay, so that was really the last application of 1C in the context of exchange rates. And here's a summary of how we put exchange rates and balance of payments together. So the exchange rate is the price of one country's currency in terms of another country's currency. And now I gave the example of a peso appreciating relative to the franc and the franc depreciating relative to the peso. And again, all of these, the peso, one way that you'll often hear it in the news is you'll hear one currency described as strengthening relative to another currency. The dollar grew stronger against the yen. The peso grew stronger relative to the franc. That's another way of expressing this idea of a currency increasing in value or appreciating. When it increases in value, it appreciates. So the franc is less expensive in terms of pesos. The peso price of francs goes down. The price of francs in pesos goes down. All of these are different ways of describing currency appreciation. Okay, which makes the purchasing power of the peso in the foreign exchange market rise, right? And then you can see how it affects the price, the relative price of goods and services in each country, and how that'll affect each country's trade balance and subsequently its current account balance. So make sure that you can walk through how a country's, the appreciation of one country's currency can be expressed and the impact on trade. And then simultaneously, as one country is appreciating, another currency is depreciating, and you want to be able to do the same thing, the same reasoning. All right, so that's putting it all together. So this was our goal for tonight, is for you to understand that in the foreign exchange market, one currency is exchanged for another, and the price of one currency in terms of the other is the exchange rate. And when one currency becomes more valuable in terms of the other, it appreciates. And when one currency becomes less valuable, it is said to depreciate. And we looked really at calculating exchange rates tonight. So that's 1C. We're really looking at using quantitative data or calculations to identify an economic concept, in this case, currency appreciation or depreciation. All right, so now you should be able to define those terms, express an exchange rate numerically and with words, view two exchange rates to determine which currency is appreciated and which currency has depreciated, and also explain how a change in exchange rates is going to affect a nation's balance of payments. Okay. All right, so this is the question I will leave you with for your lesson with Mr. Romano tomorrow. This is 2011 Form B, question 2, part A. So if you're watching live, go ahead and take a picture. If you are not watching live, you can go ahead and pause the video and take a crack at this problem. And Mr. Romano will review the answer with you tomorrow. All right, so finally, we want to issue that reminder that the College Board is very determined to make sure all students who want to be able to take these AP exams this year have devices and internet access to do so. If you or someone you know needs access to a device or the internet, please reach out to cb.org/tech. Thank you again so much for watching this lesson, and I'll look forward to seeing you in a few days. Have a good night.